Welcome all. Thank you for taking the time to attend our webinar today. SaaS has become one of the topmost agenda for many traditional software vendors. Many of them are either planning on a migration route or planning on adding a new product line to their existing traditional software suite. Either way, they are needed to make adjustments and make changes to both the business as well as the way the product is built. Keeping that in mind, Aspire is conducting today's webinar on transition to SaaS, the challenges and solutions. We have two SaaS experts today who will help us prepare for this transition. Danny Shomron from Kalia Consulting will talk on the business impact of SaaS transition, and Janaki Jayachandran from Aspire Systems will discuss the technical considerations in a SaaS development. Few housekeeping instructions. We have set all the phones to mute, and if you have any questions, please do type them in the chat window. We have also received questions from registrants during the registration process, which we will be answering during the final Q&A session, which will happen at the end of the session. And we hope, if we are not able to answer all the questions during the session, we will send you the answers over email. A quick introduction about Aspire. Aspire is a thought leader in outsourced product development, and we have helped ISVs build products, and we have released over 1,100 products so far, product releases so far, and we worked with 80+ customers. We have offices in Chennai, India, where we have our offshore center, and we also have offices in San Jose, California, and London in UK. Our first speaker today is Danny Shomron. He is a SaaS expert from Kalia Consulting. He is the recognized thought leader on the issue of SaaS, and he maintains a very active blog, Danny's Perspective on SaaS. He's held VP service operation positions at various SaaS startups, and also worked with Mercury Managed Services, which is now HP SaaS. Danny has co-authored the book, CIO Perspective, and he has contributed the SaaS chapter for that book. Now, I would like to hand over the session to Danny. Danny, give me a second while I give you the control.
Okay, I believe I have the control now.
Okay.
Thank you, Kanchana. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. When I entered the world of SaaS about 10 years ago, it wasn't even called SaaS back then, a lot of software vendors started dealing with the triple questions of if, when, and how to transition from the traditional perpetual on-premise model to the new on-demand subscription model. Now, we fast forward a few years. I believe we're way beyond the point of the if question, and we're also beyond the point of the when, because the answer to that is probably yesterday. Then I have to deal with the how. Since then, in the past few years, many software vendors have successfully transitioned to the new on-demand model and are happily selling SaaS solutions. But a large group of ISVs have failed in the process, and perhaps even a larger group has failed than those that have succeeded. Now, this presentation is about understanding the impact on the organization of the transition to SaaS, understanding the difficulties and the reasons for failures, because that is crucial for succeeding in the process. Trying to switch forward. Kanchana? Oh, okay. Okay, I will start with my premise that you need to switch to go SaaS or go home. Then I will discuss the implication of that decision and the effects I will then go through a series of quick slides touching upon every group within the organization and expected changes during this transition. Then I will discuss the recipe for failure. Why have so many ISVs succeeded in failing in this transition? And why is the process so complicated and painful? And finally, I will discuss strategies and tips on how to succeed. Okay, so let's start with my premises, which is do or die. Let's begin with the facts. According to IDC, 76% of U.S.-based companies are today consuming one or more SaaS applications. What has changed in the past 2 years is that SaaS is no longer a point solution from the perspective of the CIO. It's not a IT circumventing tactic, but CIOs are starting to treat SaaS as a strategy. Now, to underscore that, you may have heard last week the U.S. government launched the online cloud marketplace called apps.gov. And you may have also heard about Microsoft launching their web office last week as well. As for predictions, IDC, Gartner, Forrester, Microsoft are all predicting an accelerated growth of SaaS adoption across the industry. And this is spurred not only by the downturn of the economy, but by the fact that SaaS has become mainstream. Now, I do not believe that there has been a software startup in the past 2 years that is delivering software in the old model, and I'm talking about the U.S. market at this point. Every new software startup is building an on-demand offering. Nobody is building anymore the on-premise offering, which means that every software that will be offered out there starting a few years back will be the on-demand model. And these new young companies, not only are they building on-demand models, they're building them on the cloud, through the cloud, and will be offered in the cloud. So if you're asking about my prediction, 5 years from now, the term SaaS will not be used any longer because it will basically be the only model of delivery. So if you, as an ISV, will not have an on-offering demand, I believe you will become irrelevant. Now, software vendors understand the picture. Some of them after many years of resistance, and believe me, I've been working with a lot of these companies that keep coming back to me year after year, looking at the SaaS options and saying, no, we won't do this year. But a me-too approach will not fail. It's not just a matter of a delivery mechanism. Now, there's a common misconception that once you get through the technological barriers, such as figuring out configurability, architecting, multi-hierarchy, multi-tenancy, and if you figure out the pricing, you're good to go for SaaS. Now, while these aspects are extremely important, it must be understood that the transition to on-demand is a total paradigm shift in the company. It's a cultural shift in the company, and that affects every silo within the organization. It introduces new functions, new concepts, and entities that were not there on the on-premise model. The idea of switching between selling a product and selling a service is so profound. You can compare it to a company manufacturing coffee, and then they decide that they're going to open a series of franchise coffee shops, such as like Starbucks. In both cases, they're selling coffee, but the business is totally different. Mind you, the changes are so profound in this model that a lot of pure-play SaaS companies don't get it either, because most of them, because of the nascent state of SaaS in business, most of these employees have come from a product company, not from a service company, and they continue making all these mistakes of the old paradigm, even though they're a pure-play SaaS company. So what I'm going to do now is go through a quick series touching upon the various silos or groups within the organization and look at the expected changes within those groups. Now, for lack of time, I can't go into detail for most of these, but I will touch upon a few points in each group, but then we have the Q&A session, so please feel free to address them if you have more questions. Let's start with engineering. Since technical matters are so critical, my co-presenter, Janaki, will dedicate the second half of this presentation to this aspect. But I would like to discuss a few points. On one hand, the development becomes simpler because you do not have to deal with a myriad of configurations, the various stacks of operating systems, web servers, application servers, database. You have a single platform, that's the only one you deal with. For example, you do not have to support all of Oracle, Microsoft, SQL, MySQL, Ingress, and so on. You select the database that best suits you, and you work with that only. On the other hand, considerations that are foreign to the on-premise solutions are introduced. Issues such as service readiness, high availability, load, performance, scalability, security, data retention, all of these are crucial to the successful operation of your services. Another issue is release cycles. They become much shorter. Some SaaS companies release a minor version every 2 weeks. Others, it's once every quarter. But forget the 12 to 18 month release cycles as you have with the regular on-premise companies. So the company should consider developing or adopting agile programming or extreme programming to be able to quickly produce additions and fixes and solid ones on the fly. Another important aspect is that your engineers can no longer hide in their ivory towers. The contact with the end users is much more immediate. End users respond immediately. The interaction of engineering with the real world becomes necessary, and they will have to dirty their hands and deal with the products of their work. QA in an on-premise environment basically deals with functional testing, and that's it. So the good news is that you need to support a single platform, and you don't have to deal with, again, with all the various combinations that are out there. So that simplifies the process of testing, and you have the actual system that you can test on, which will be the production environment. On the other hand, beyond functional testing, you have performance testing, you have load testing, and security testing. All these are skill sets that have to be acquired and added to the QA team. As with engineering, the release cycles are much shorter, and the QA team will have to adjust to the new agile programming as well. A product company never needs to own and operate a production environment. Therefore, a new entity must be created to build, monitor, manage, and operate the production environment. Even if that happens to be on the cloud, and a lot of these services are outsourced, like a lot of the new SaaS startups are doing right now, using Amazon or using the Salesforce platform, or soon the Azure and Google apps and so on. The responsibility still lies within this group, and it has a central role connecting the inward and outward facing groups within the organization. So you'll have to recruit the right people. Usually these are DBAs, system network engineers, application engineers, all these functions that were once part perhaps of the IT of the ISV, but now becoming they are very crucial and part of the operations of the business itself. The operation group becomes the hub of the offering and will work tightly with the customer support and with the engineering group, and you can expect contention between the engineering and the operations group, especially in the beginning of this process. Customer support. Because renewals are critical, customer satisfaction, customer success, and end-user experience are paramount to the survival of the business. The interaction with the customer support group is critical. The CSR, the customer service representative, has to acquire a higher set of skills. Keep in mind that, as with a product company, whenever an end user has an issue with the software, they call in the help desk of their own IT. This no longer is a solution. All these calls will come directly to the doorstep of the service provider, of the SaaS provider. So your CSR will be extremely busy with, you may have hundreds, thousands, or tens of thousands of users on the system. These CSRs will perhaps be on a first-name basis with a lot of the end users. They will have to deal with issues such as configuring the browsers on the end user and understanding internet protocols, understanding their own production environment, perhaps realizing what is the state of traffic on the internet right now. You will need to acquire application and domain-level skills and problem resolution skills, because a lot of that will be dealing with that. A lot of that will be dealing with accounting issues for the end users. Again, these are issues that are never part of the regular customer support in a product environment. Customer service will switch from a 9x5 to 24x7 mode. And this is a huge change. And support will have to start working in shifts. They will work tightly with the operations group and need to establish new procedures and processes such as incident management, because downtime will not be tolerated. So keep in mind a higher skill set and probably a higher pay for those new CSRs. Okay, the changes in the sales group are so profound that they deserve a separate webinar session. It suffice to say that the state of mind has to switch between selling a product to selling a service, and I've mentioned that already before, with emphasis on farming rather than hunting. There will be much shorter sales cycles. So you can go down from your typical enterprise sales cycle that can be anywhere between 6 to 18 months. They can squeeze down into weeks. There would be much less face time with the customer, if any. So forget about the cross-continental trips and whining and dining with the customers. A lot of these deals would be closed on the phone. Of course, Salesforce compensation becomes a huge issue, because you have to switch from a shoot-and-forget attitude to one that constantly nurtures the relationship with the customers and ensures their success in order to retain the revenue over time. You as a salesperson will feel the pain, and you as a salesperson will resist these changes. Okay, without going into much detail, marketing in SaaS is a lot more in sync with the new Web 2.0 concepts, such as blogs, Twitter, email campaigns, and lead generation automation. You should consider building user and developer communities around the offering. It's an important tool to utilize. And I suggest you look at the Sales 2.0 approach, which tightly couples sales and marketing. Okay, finance. Once again, financial issues merit a separate presentation. A lot of them are a lot of complex issues. There are many financial aspects that we need consideration. The most prominent, of course, is the subscription-based billing, which affects revenue recognition and forecasting. In the product world, billing consists of a one-time upfront payment for the license and perhaps a yearly service subscription. That could be easily handled with an Excel sheet. When you're talking about a subscription-based billing system, you will need to deal with a lot more complex issues such as metering and collection, service level compensation and renewals, and changes that may occur every month per customer based on the usage or number of seats. As with customer support, installation and upgrades are things of the past, where a lot of the professional services work has been done in the product company in this area. A lot of the work now would be done around integration with back-end systems. And if the product is well architected, integration engines will be used to perform much of the work, so perhaps even part of that will not be needed anymore. The professional service staff will need to encompass more domain-level knowledge of building solutions to ensure the customer success. Again, it's all around customer success. It's an ongoing relationship. And travel to customer site will be greatly reduced because much of the work could be done remotely. Legal and compliance. There are hosts of other topics regarding legal and compliance issues. For lack of time, I will not discuss here. but it's important to understand how much of a change will be required throughout the organization. There are new entities such as SLAs, renewals, add-on services that need to be dealt with on the legal level. Now, you have to also realize that your company becomes part of a chain of providers so that you're not only facing the customer, your customers on legal issues, but you're facing backwards the list of providers of hosting, network, and storage services. And since the software is hosted under your auspices, issues of compliance become important where they did not exist before. Issues of privacy, security, operational compliance are requested by your customers. A lot of questions that come up. For example, if your customers are asking for a SaaS 70 certification, would your hosting provider need one? And if your hosting providers have one, does that cover you as well? A lot of these questions are still unclear because it's an emerging market and people are feeling their way around it. Okay, so I've quickly gone through a list of the various departments and groups within the organization, and as you can see, as you can witness, the impact of the organization is substantial. Now, an important point for me to emphasize is that the more successful you are as an ISV, the more difficult it will be for you to transition, and the higher failure rate you will have in the transition. Take, for example, SAP. They have tried already 3 times and poured God knows how many millions into the endeavor, and they have fared very poorly so far. But kudos to them. They're continuing to try, and they keep on pushing their on-demand exercise. But they have deep pockets, and not everybody can afford that. You have to understand that the transition is akin to a DNA transplant in order to change the behavior of the beast. So, as I said, the impact on the organization is substantial, and you should expect a pushback. And if you do not have a full commitment from the board all the way down to the last player, there are myriads of ways to fail. I have noted 2 colleagues that have related their experiences lately to me. Both of them had the same experience. Both were hired by 2 different companies to bring about a SaaS change into those companies. They both succeeded on the technological level, had a beautiful offering, and in both companies, sales failed to be brought on board. And then no customers were engaged, and the whole issue was deemed a failure. Both of my friends were fired from the company following that. And in one of the firms, the CEO and the VP of engineering were sacked because of the failure of this exercise. I can relate from my own experience. When I was working at Mercury Managed Services, which is now HP SaaS, the CEO dictated the directive to all sales personnel to first sell the on-demand solution. That is the first thing they have to do, and only if that fails, offer the traditional solution. Well, guess what? There were hardly any on-demand, hardly any managed services sold. So all the sales personnel were selling first and only the traditional solution. And why is that? Because the compensation structure was much more attractive to go the old way. So it didn't matter that the CEO issued a directive to the sales personnel. They just went ahead and did what was good for them. So this was a failure that was not recognized by the company. Mind you, HP SaaS or Mercury Managed Service learned a lesson and are doing a very good job today. So as I said, expect a pushback from every group within the organization. Have I mentioned sales already? But in general, people do not like change and do not like to reinvent themselves. And each and every person in the group can put sticks in your wheels and derail the process. And of course, there's the fear of cannibalization of your existing sales. And I will touch upon that in the Q&A session. So, okay. So that was the bad news. The good news is, and you may not like this, is that A, you don't have a choice, and B, there is a path to success. If you understand what you're doing, if the goals are clear, and if you're aware of the barriers you need to cross. The most important aspect is understanding the need for the cultural shift and the impact it will have on the organization. And make sure you have the commitment from the C-level and Z-level all the way, and it trickles down all the way to the last employee. And make sure you get sales involved and excited at a very early stage. And a somewhat eccentric example, I worked a few years ago with a content management software company that the board of directors decided that they're going to the on-demand model. What they did was they brought in a new CEO. The CEO went ahead and replaced all the C-level and V-level management in the team except for VP engineering. Then they went and hired out a totally new sales force that a lot of them came from the service industry and not from the product industry. And they are a very successful SaaS company today. That's the bottom line. And that is, again, akin to a DNA transplant. While I don't necessarily subscribe to these extremities, a smart move would be to spin off a new entity, whether it's a legal one or a conceptually a new entity, but create this small group within your company. The important point is that you appoint a GM or VP SaaS to head this new entity and enable them to enjoy the benefits of a stable ISV with its R&D capabilities and its customer base, but they allow them to act as a startup within your company and have the freedom to rethink everything, so they won't be trapped by the old ways. Another important point is do not try to build out your full offering in SaaS. Select the subsystem that your market research has deemed would be a good offering and build that as a POC, as a proof of concept. Keep in mind you will go through a hybrid phase, supporting all your existing perpetual license customers. Offer the on-demand to all your new customers and realize that you're going to offer to a new customer base that didn't exist before. Usually you're going to the smaller SMBs with your on-demand offering. Whenever one of your existing perpetual license customers has to upgrade to the subsystem, offer them the on-demand. Don't even give them the option to go on-premise any longer. So within 2 years, you should have most of your customers moving to the on-demand because you do not want to continue with the hybrid situation much longer. It'll be a true mess for your business, and you have to duplicate most of your functions within the company. Integrate existing solutions. When I started 10 years ago, there was nothing out there. We had to reinvent the wheel for everything that had to do with the service operating support level. There are a lot of technology out there now that can save you much time and resources. A lot of it is offered as a SaaS solution itself. Things such as billing, provisioning, integration, single sign-on, reporting, and of course all the development platform, or what's called platform as a service, is all out there. Use that. And finally, get help. There are enough people out there that have done this before. Listen to them. Get technical help from companies such as Appfire to help you save time. It may be more expensive in the short run. It will save you much more time in the long run, and it will ensure success. And believe me, this is what you want to do. You want to make sure that this works right for you. So, I'm running out of time here, so to summarize, I believe that very few ISVs will find themselves in the playground without an on-demand solution a few years down the line. Be prepared for a cultural shock in the company. It's a price you will need to pay. The success relies on getting commitment from all the employees to make this work. And finally, just do it. The earlier you jump into the cold water, the faster you will reap the benefits and lower the risk of becoming irrelevant. Thank you. Sanjana.
Thank you, Danny. That was very insightful. Before I move on to the next speaker, I would like to quickly take a poll. So here is a poll. what are the key challenges in moving to SaaS? First one, suitability of my product for SaaS, willingness of my clients to move to SaaS, factors like data security and things and such considerations, availability of suitable skill sets, budget, or availability of infrastructure. So I would like to give a few more seconds. And then we will close the poll. Okay, so we are closing the poll now. Thank you. So here are the results. Interesting. Suitability of my product has got 60%, and willingness of my clients to move to SaaS is 43%, availability of suitable skill sets 33%, and budget 30%, and availability of infrastructure 30%. Thank you for the for taking the poll. Now we'll move on to our next speaker. It's Janaki Jayachandran. He heads the SaaS specialization at Aspire Systems. In his current capacity, he is responsible for both the business development and the delivery functions for SaaS. He keeps track of the SaaS industry, and he keeps himself updated on the latest technologies, including cloud computing and things like that, and helps our customers in identifying the right strategy. So now I would like to hand over the control to Janaki so he can give us insights about the technical considerations involved in moving to SaaS.
Thank you, Kanchana. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to be here. In the next 20 minutes, we'll be looking at the various challenges that an ISV will have to face from a technical standpoint in transitioning their product, on-premise product, to a SaaS-based one. Let's get started with a feasibility assessment. As we saw the survey results as well, one of the key things is the suitability of moving to SaaS itself. Now, as any venture requires to assess the benefits of it before getting in, the same holds good for moving to SaaS. So many times the assessment part is kind of overlooked, and people tend to get into the finer details of it. But what I have shown here is some of the key considerations that you should be having in your mind while you are evaluating the SaaS option. And what I have given here is in the table is some kind of a reference or a guideline value. It is not a thumb rule as such, but it's more to guide in terms of how these parameters could impact the overall SaaS benefits that one can get. For example, the nature of the product itself. So there are different kinds of products in the market. There could be designing related products which are very graphics oriented, and there are typical information management systems. Now, obviously the effort involved in converting these products or taking these products to a SaaS model is going to be high. So you kind of get more benefit when your product is kind of an IMS. Now, having said that, now each of these line items cannot be individually viewed or taken as a final call. Rather, this whole thing has to be collectively looked at and see if overall you are able to gain the SaaS benefits out of it. For example, the number of customized source code versions. The smaller the number, it's easier to manage. The pain or the effort maintainability issues comes in when your number of customized versions of your source code are high. So, for example, if it's like a greater than 10 source code versions, maintaining that is going to be a pretty hectic job in an on-premise model, and hence moving to SaaS will gain you a lot of benefit and a lot of savings from a money perspective. The same holds good for like a number of current installations. If it is just around, let's take an example of less than 25, then it's again easier to manage, but assuming like it's greater than 250, it's going to be extremely complex. Some of the other aspects that you should also consider is the expected business growth in the coming years, and which could form as one of the parameters for your SaaS benefits. Similarly, the integration requirements that your system or product has with external systems. There are certain systems which require very high integration requirements. It has to connect to almost 10 different systems and has to perform in sync with that. And there are systems which just act as independent systems and do not have any integration requirements. So your effort in terms of going to SaaS is going to be very low in case of low integration requirements. And likewise, the stage of your product, while assuming any product goes through a certain life cycle, right from the startup to growth to mature and decline. Now, if you're already in a declining state, you may not be able to reap much out of the SaaS. Rather, you may want to try to build a new product straight on the SaaS model itself. And one of the key things is customer acceptance, because in a SaaS kind of a scenario, your product is going to be in a central hosted environment, and as well the data is going to be centrally available. So you need to look out for the type of your product and if it really makes acceptable levels for your customer to have the data stored externally. And few other things like implementation time frame. So in an on-premise, one of the challenges the implementation time frame it takes to customize the product and roll it out for production. So that is one other aspect that you may want to see how much I am spending today in an on-premise, and hence how much I can save when I move to a SaaS model where it's going to be it's relatively easy to roll out an implementation. Likewise, the releases being done in a year, like Danny was also mentioning, if you are in a position where you have to often release your upgrades to your customer, in an on-premise model, it's going to be extremely costly, extremely time-consuming to keep rolling out releases, and hence they typically tend to keep a larger time frame. Whereas in a kind of SaaS, it makes your life much more easier, and releasing often is not a problem at all. And the bigger question is, what is the current challenge that I'm facing in an on-premise model? While SaaS definitely brings in a lot of advantages, a lot of benefits. Say, for example, if your current challenge is lack of features, then obviously SaaS, moving to SaaS is not going to really solve the problem. Rather, you may have to look at some other aspects of making your product better. But say your challenge is more in terms of your customers' ability to have a huge investment upfront, infrastructure availability at your customers' end. If those are some of the challenges due to which you are missing out your customers, then definitely you are going to reap a lot of benefit out of the SaaS. Now, assuming that when you do this kind of an exercise and hopefully the SaaS benefit scale looks at a positive direction, the next challenge comes with the architecture that you will have to adhere to in your SaaS model. Now, architecture brings in a lot of complexities in it, particularly for a SaaS kind of a version. Let's look at some of the key parameters that have to be considered or thought about. One is the scalability, which is primarily the ability to handle increasing loads. And SaaS, as we know, is going to be centrally hosted. So as you keep adding customers, your system should be capable of expanding itself and still be able to service the increasing customer load. Performance is one common aspect which most of the times gets overlooked, particularly when you move from an on-premise to a SaaS model. Because in an on-premise, you typically serve a lesser number of users. For example, an organization may have, say, 100 users. And in an on-premise kind of a state, all you need to worry about is how can I give performance with 100 users. Whereas when you move to a SaaS model, say you are going to have 100 customers logging to the same kind of system, then we are talking about a multiplication of 100 into 100, which takes the equation to a totally different level. So your performance has to be really thought about and worked on at an architecture level. Availability is one of the key aspects in your SaaS version. So you need to watch out for your SLA compliance and accordingly have your technical solution designed. For example, redundancy support or backups. And in some cases, offline mode of working is something that is now commonly being done in your SaaS versions, where even if your primary application, SaaS application is down, you will still be able to access some of the key functionalities of your product without an internet or without the system being available. And other standard things are the security aspects. Obviously, is one of the key considerations. So you need to watch out for your physical as well as network security and how your data is going to be stored, the encryption of it. Integration requirements, whether there are any standard compliances to be made, and that could be both inbound as well as outbound integration requirements. Your system has to be designed in a way that it allows easy integration with external systems. Extensibility is something that allows your system, gives the flexibility for your system to meet some of the customers' needs from a standpoint of, say, different set of fields required in a particular form. Or they may look for an additionally or a totally new form that needs to be added to the product. Now, the extensibility part comes in where you will be able to accommodate to such kind of variations from the customer's requirement without much of coding involved. Multi-tenancy is one of the key aspects in a SaaS environment. Multi-tenancy is something that allows you to handle multiple organizations or multiple tenants getting into the same system and still be able to work with that. We'll look into it in much more detail in the coming slides. Configurability. So in a SaaS environment, different customers, different users are going to be using the same product, and hence the amount of configurability that needs to be supported will be very high. And personalization, where the user can customize it to the way they want, or it could be what they call the organization, where the organization itself can also customize it, maybe add their own logo, add their own themes, or as I mentioned, they may change the forms, the way the fields are being showing up. So all those changes should be typically supported and hence should be considered in your architecture. Auditing is one other feature where you kind of keep track of the data that is getting changed and the person that is changing the data. Now, having done with the architecture part of it, moving on, let's try to take a couple of minutes to understand the cloud as such. There have been a lot of new terminologies that have been arising in the recent times. So I'd like to take a couple of minutes to kind of sort out what is what. In a SaaS kind of a scenario, we are talking about a web application at the least. Now, any web application is going to have the components that you are seeing here, which is primarily the hardware where you have to host your application, and a framework which forms the basis for your software, on top of which your application, which is the functionalities, are being built. Now let's look at some of the needs of each of these components. At a hardware level, you need network architects or system administrators who can provide you that kind of a hardware setup, the hosting requirements, take care of security as such. At a framework component level, you need software architects who can give you reliable, tested and proven architecture, on top of which you can start developing your application, where you will need developers, and obviously you need them to develop functionality as quick as possible and roll it out to production. So let's look at how some of these components are getting changed in today's world. The hardware part is now what is coming as the infrastructure as a service, the IaaS, where the hardware portion of it is completely taken over as a separate service by itself. Likewise, the framework is replaced by something called the PaaS, what stands for the platform as a service, where the platform as a service comes up with its own extended platform or a framework, which will give you the flexibility and allows you to build applications at a rapid pace. An application itself today is, what we are talking about is the SaaS application. Let's also look at some of the providers for each of these components in today's world. So the infrastructure as a service, some of the leading providers are the Amazon EC2, Microsoft's Azure, Rackspace, and PaaS providers are Force.com, Google App, Longjump, and SaaS is your own application. So with that background, let's try to further understand the difference between a SaaS and a PaaS, because it's going to be a strategical decision that has to be made in terms of what direction you are going to take for your SaaS implementation. The SaaS as such is a concept. All that SaaS defines is the ability to deliver your product to your customer through an internet and without the need of hosting or doing anything within the premises of the customer. So it's a generic statement, it's a generic concept, is what SaaS is about. Comparatively, if we look at PaaS, it's primarily a software, it's a tangible software, it's a technology where you get the platform itself. So in the SaaS, you get the delivery model is only defined there. It defines that you deliver it over an internet without disturbing your customer's infrastructure or without requiring your customer's infrastructure. Whereas in the PaaS, it defines how your software is going to be built itself as well as delivered. And software in the SaaS is simply delivered over the internet with no setup required at the customer end. Whereas in a PaaS, as we saw, the software itself is built on top of the platform. So your SaaS application is built on top of the PaaS, which lies beneath. And in a SaaS kind of a scenario, it allows you to reuse your existing software. Because it's simply a change in your delivery model, then you can always reuse your existing software, your existing on-premise app. But however, you have to do some tweakings to it to make it SaaS compatible. Whereas in a PaaS scenario, it mostly requires a complete rewrite because your platform is completely new. So you have to start building your software on top of this PaaS. In a SaaS, it kind of becomes easier to support a hybrid model. Hybrid is typically supporting both on-demand and on-premise. Whereas in a PaaS, you are kind of relying in a single direction, which is more like a SaaS solution alone. And SaaS, there is no concept of a lock-in or a technology lock-in. Whereas in a PaaS, you kind of rely on your PaaS vendor or PaaS provider to continuously provide you with the support on the platform front. So you need to carefully look at the pros and cons of each of these directions and then try to choose the right direction for the product. Now let's look at both the directions and see what the further benefits that it can give you. In a SaaS model, when you decide to get into, you have to decide the right maturity model. So primarily you can support your SaaS solution to any extent you want. This is a Microsoft certified, Microsoft recommended maturity model, 4 maturity models, where you can go for a simple level 1, which simply just says you just host it for each of your customers, which is tenants basically. Or you could go for like a multi-tenancy, which is level 3, and level 4 with a load balancing option. So some of the considerations you need to keep in mind are, one is the time that you have to take to market your SaaS solution, the budget that you have in hand, the business volume that you are expecting out of the SaaS solution, and the size of the product itself. To get a more detailed view of how these maturity things can be decided, this is a simple table that will give you an indication of how the factors constitute between these levels. So as you saw, the time and cost, maintenance efforts are going to be extremely high in a level 1 solution, and as you go up the level, it's going to be low. Likewise, the scalability is going to be poor in level 1, whereas it's going to be high in kind of level 4. So you need to strike a balance between these factors and what you gain and lose in each of these levels, and accordingly decide your maturity level. So some of the considerations you should have in your mind to summarize are: one is availability of technical skill sets. Obviously, you need the technical skill set to come out with the SaaS architecture, the SaaS platform, because you are not going for a PaaS, so you have to develop your own platform, choosing the right model. And also keep in mind that level 1 and 2 are more pointing towards the customers, or the value gets more added to the customers, whereas level 3 and 4 is more towards improving the efficiency of the ISV's operations. So you need to carefully look at where do you want to get in at what point in time. And few other things you need to consider are the virtualization options, which could help you solve some of the multi-tenancy problem while it's not a direct solution. And there are also pre-built SaaS frameworks which could help you cut short time and jumpstart working on the functionality. On the PaaS front, there's a simple strategic decision you need to make whether you are going to focus on just the functionality or are you going to focus on both functionality and engineering aspects. Because in a PaaS scenario, the engineering aspects are completely taken out and you just have to concentrate on building functionality on top of it. And say in case if you're using a current software which is in a legacy technology, then anyway it's time to change, so maybe PaaS makes a lot of sense. And in some PaaS providers, they also support particular verticals, domains, for example, CRMs, or it could be supply chains. So you can leverage some of the features provided by these PaaS providers, and it acts as a one-stop solution for your SaaS and PaaS. And some of the other considerations are, as we saw, the technical skill set availability is required here, because PaaS also comes with its own technology recommendations. So your PaaS providers will decide the technology, so you need to be able to support the technology. The lock-in aspect we saw. Also an ROI between the SaaS and PaaS will give you an insight in terms of what will work out from a budget perspective. And some of the vertical support of domain support and vertical support. The support for NFRs by your PaaS providers. It has to be in compliance with your SLAs that you are committing to your customers. And also there are platforms which do not mandate complete rewrite. For example, SaaS Grid is one such a platform where they try to reuse as much as possible your existing code and still be able to provide you with a platform. And obviously the business risk in storing data at an external location, because in a SaaS at least you have a choice of keeping the data within the premises of the ISV itself. Whereas in a PaaS, it's most likely going to be outside of the ISV, and hence you need to convince the customer for a two-level thing, which is primarily taking out the data from them as well as keeping it outside of the ISV. Some of the administration aspects which also comes into picture in a SaaS are, one is the tenant management, where you have to keep adding your customers or removing or modifying, adding further modules to them. Metering, which starts looking at the consumption of the usage in terms of the features according to the licensing that you are going to provide. There are different licensing models that one could offer depending on the product. Could be either user-based or transaction-based. So your metering and licensing will go hand in hand. And billing is another option where you can keep track of all your billing through the system itself. And payment gateway is something which can help your customers to make decisions online and buy modules or extend their licenses in a quick and easy way. And analytics will help you determine the usage of features or modules. Accordingly, you can decide your product strategy moving forward. And once you're done with this, the final thing is to get into the cloud, which is primarily the internet. So you can have either one of these options, which is primarily self-hosting, which is the ISV itself hosting the solution, or you can approach data centers, which primarily host it on behalf of you, or you could choose an IaaS provider, as we saw on the other slide, where they provide you the complete gamut of services for hardware part. So looking at some of the challenges involved in the hosting perspective, one is your availability. As you mentioned, you need to comply with your SLAs, your physical and the network security of the application being hosted, the backup capabilities involved, just in case if there is a problem, you should be able to be up and running quickly, the internet bandwidth and redundant lines, which is again indirectly leading to your availability as well as performance, the capacity storage-wise, as well as hardware scalability, which is where the IaaS kind of vendors provide you a lot of benefits, and ease of upgrades, the hardware that it can support to. And so that brings us to the end of it, as well as you get into the cloud with a SaaS solution. Thank you.
Thank you, Janaki. It was very informative, but now we ran out of time. I think we'll probably take a couple of questions quickly, if that is all right. Danny, the first question is for you. How do you recommend introducing a SaaS product line in addition to traditionally licensed products, minimizing cannibalization?
Yes, I said in my presentation that we regard this in the Q&A session.
Right.
As for cannibalization, I know this is always an issue that's troubling customers, afraid that if we offer an on-demand solution, it will eat up our own customer base. So there are 2 points that should be taken into consideration. First of all, the initial on-demand offering will go into acquiring a new customer base that was not available to you before. So the usual pattern is that you're selling your enterprise software to the large enterprise IT, but most of these small, medium businesses are off the radar because of the pricing and the maintenance considerations. Therefore, you can acquire a large new customer base using the on-demand. But let's look at the point itself of the cannibalization. If your existing customers are susceptible to taking on your SaaS solution, and you're afraid of cannibalizing that, then keep in mind that if you do not offer a SaaS solution, your competitors will. So you're not only you will be losing the customers to your own cannibalization, you'll be losing them, period, because they will go to the provider that will give them the on-demand solution.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks, Danny. The next question is for Janaki. Do you recommend an offline system at client end to reduce the risk of connectivity issues?
Absolutely. As I was pointing to, one of the architecture considerations you should have in mind is the kind of product that you are supporting. For example, if you are supporting an healthcare-related product, now the availability of it becomes very critical, and hence you will have to look out for supporting at least the key functionalities in an offline mode. So what it allows is that even if your primary system is down, there are other mechanisms. For example, it could be a small a desktop kind of a thing, or a smart line kind of an application, which can continuously keep pulling the information back from the main system. And once the main system is down, it will help you to kind of still operate on the data that it last retrieved. So yes, but the decision is primarily depending on the kind of product you have and the key functionalities that you want to bring it offline.
Okay.
I would just like, Mr. Danny, I would just like to add a comment to that. The technology of offering an offline system is still quite young. There's a lot of discussion about this in the past year or so. My point is that, in general, I agree that it's a good idea, but I wouldn't bother with it at this point. There's so many other issues you need to deal with before you reach that, because this is really the highest level of evolution in SaaS. So I wouldn't worry about those issues at this point. It would be interesting to take that into account when you architect your system. But today, the issues of internet connectivity is diminishing quite rapidly, at least in most Western countries. So it's becoming a non-issue in that respect. So again, smart to think about it. I wouldn't worry about it right now.
Okay. Okay, Danny. So I think we've already run out of time, but I would like to finish it with one last question, and we have received few other questions which we will definitely send you the answers by email. So the last question is again to Janaki. Danny, you can feel free to add after Janaki. How do you deal with scalability? What sort of redundancy needs to be in place? What performance would users expect?
Sure. So from a scalability perspective, as I mentioned, you really have to do your own planning there. You need to look at the kind of load that you expect down the line, and make sure that both the product as well as the infrastructure is capable of handling that load. And this is where, as I mentioned, from a hardware perspective, your infrastructure as a service provider become very handy, because one of the key benefits they bring in is this dynamic scalability in terms of hardware support. So you really need to make use of it. And in terms of redundancy, yes, as I mentioned, redundancy could be either at your internet line connection, or it could be the complete software, which could be available in kind of a load balancing mode. So even if one of the servers goes down, you still have the other one which can still serve the other audiences. And from a performance point of view, yes, performance is becoming a key, and it's been getting a lot of attention in the recent times. The expectation from a performance point of view it kind of varies, but generally speaking, the expectations is like around the time frame of like any request I make in a web application. The typical response time is like around 3 to 5 seconds. Obviously, it kind of varies for exceptional pages or exceptional requests, but that's the region around where the expectations are at this point in time.
Okay. Danny, would you like to add to it, or?
No, I think we've basically run out of time. But,
that's right.
Just to mention one thing, that all the new IaaS, infrastructure as a service, give you all the scalability and redundancy on the fly without you having to deal with that. So that's one way of resolving it. Okay,
great, wonderful. Okay, thanks, Danny, thanks, Janaki, and thanks everyone for your participation. And we hope you found this webinar useful. We will send you the recording as well as share the presentation very shortly, maybe tomorrow. Thanks a lot. Have a great day.